I have quite a full collection of art supplies, including quality artist-grade paints, fancy pencils and pens, yet honestly, I feel the most inspired and bubbling with excitement when I art journal using more affordable, accessible, and even unconventional tools. I believe that nothing stirs up creative expression more than adventurous and inventive and oftentimes unexpected ways of making things. In this video, I'll share with you my favorite practical and realistic tips for inventive art journaling on a budget while keeping everything fun and engaging. I broke those into 3 categories, and by the end of the video, for those who like to dig deeper into the psychology and philosophy of art journaling, I will share some thoughts on what budget-friendly creativity can give us more than just saved money. There are timestamps in the video, so you can navigate it the way you want it. If you're new here, welcome, I'm Anna, and I started this channel to share art journaling tips and inspirations, and also how I build my personal art practice for self-exploration. I'm a multimedia self-taught creative, and I have another YouTube channel with monthly videos about intentional living. I also have a Patreon community with weekly videos on more personal subjects about my life and my creativity here in Serbia. And I also have a Substack on art journaling. I come up with ideas, make my art, write essays, and turn them into videos all by myself using my human intelligence, so no artificial intelligence or AI is involved in my creative processes. The first category of tips for inventive art journaling is DIY, which I believe is in the DNA of all creatives. Utilize a maker in you. So many of us art journalers have more than one creative passion, so maybe it's worth checking if you can use other creative supplies for art journaling. Embroidery floss or using yarn from knit or crochet projects to add an unexpected elements, or using scraps of fabric to create a fun background or turn it into a collage element. I use my old carving tools to make small stamps for art journaling, and I talk about it more in the previous video on this channel. If you're a gardener, maybe you will enjoy adding more dried plant details into your art journal entries, or maybe you can even attempt to dye paper using natural dyes from plants, berries, or leaves, and it's just an idea. Look at your creative tools without categorization, like this is for sewing and this is for art journaling. Look at the function of the tool first and foremost. Inventiveness is all about finding fresh and unconventional ways of using the most common objects. Collect your own ephemera, and this is where junk journaling mechanics comes in handy. It's just my personal opinion, but I don't see any meaning in using factory-printed, vintage-looking ephemera that is used only for art journaling. I just don't see anything creative or inspiring in that. I'm being very subjective, and my initial intention in saying this is not to trash other people's choices, but rather to strike inner creative chords, to turn unobvious, unexpected materials into something utterly meaningful and unique. During my short and uneventful scrapbooking era that happened years and years ago before I even started collaging, I bought 2 huge sets of square papers that were called scrapbooking papers, and basically they were just patterned papers with different ephemera organized in various ways. I was told by the scrapbooking community that I was trying to become part of that I needed such things, just as I needed a bunch of other factory printed thingies like cutouts and different stuff. I'm sure if you've ever heard about scrapbooking, you can envision what all those supplies look like. Thankfully, my passion didn't last long because I very quickly got bored and I felt limited by the choices that I had, although those papers and ephemera looked very varied. But to me, they started feeling very bland and very generic. Last year, I created my first and for now the only junk journal, a tiny one, using scraps and ephemera from the stuff I was decluttering as we got ready to move countries. And it felt so much fun. There is a dedicated video on my channel where I talk about this in detail. Now I utilize a different personal ephemera in my art journaling all the time. I invite you to use receipts, invoices, napkins, fragments of sugar packages from a cafe that you went to, train tickets, prescriptions. Use the patterns of your own unique life and experience instead of the dead store-bought ephemera. And all these rhymes with the next two tips. Paint and print your own papers. This is something that I started doing not that long time ago and I got obsessed. It opened up so many color and style options, some interesting and unexpected patterns that got developed into unique stories on my art journal pages. I use such papers in collages and also as pages for DIY art journals. Any medium that leaves a mark can be used for creating papers. So far, I've tried gouache and watercolors and acrylic paints and also different stamping techniques. There is a very cool technique that is called the frottage, and it can be used for transferring almost any interesting relief onto paper. The possibilities are truly endless here, and again, this inventive approach removes the need to buy very generic factory printed papers that are usually advertised as must-haves for junk journaling or art journaling or just any creative hobby that involves paper. Besides, making stuff by ourselves instead of over-consuming very often unnecessary things helps us feel more in control of our own life and gain at least a little bit of agency back. Repurpose your own art. Draw and paint on top of something that you've created but ended up not liking that much. Cut your paint studies and rearrange them into a collage piece, or use them as pages in a DIY art journal. The most natural initial reaction when we make something that we don't quite like is to toss it away or remove the page completely from the sketchbook. But what if we treat that piece of ourselves as something that is a preparation for future art? What if it can be developed into something else, something that was meant to be born instead of being tossed away? Repurposing or revamping is an utterly exciting act that boosts our inventiveness and proves to us that our creativity is invincible. This was the DIY category, but of course we don't have to, and we simply cannot DIY everything that we might need for art journaling. So in case you discover that you need to go to an art department to buy something that you need, consider exploring alternative departments that offer things that are always, and I underline this word, always cheaper and more accessible than stuff in the art department. Kids stationery and school supplies. My top picks from this department usually include glue stick, cheap gouache or tempera sets for painting papers, and I was very surprised to discover how well they work. With these cheap paints, I was able to overcome my anxiety of wasting paints, wasting art materials. I use a lot of expressive techniques in my art journaling that use up a lot of material, and thus I am able now to create without that fear of not having enough. Also, recently I was able to find linoleum for linocut practice. It was around $3 or $4 a piece. I haven't used it yet. And when I was looking for sponge rollers, I found a $1 set of these in a kids' craft section. They work great for stencil printing that I've started exploring just recently. Or I found these very cool round brushes with coarse bristles also in the kids' craft department. Office stationery and supplies. My favorite picks are the following. Simple thin paper that I use for creating painted and patterned paper and also for DIY in art journals. Self-adhesive paper for the same painting purposes. Stamp pads and refills. Those are so much more affordable than dedicated scrapbooking variants, and honestly, I like the quality and versatility of office ink pads more. And here are some of my experiments with these. Construction and renovation tools, such as sponges and rollers for different stencil printing techniques, or brushes with very coarse bristles for structured strokes. I still have to experiment with these more. They are on my exploration list. For now, I always buy paper tape at the renovation department. It's much cheaper than in the art department. Category number 3. Random and uncurated freebies. Collage is my main and most loved medium, and I see how in the collage community great emphasis is put on finding or buying cool vintage magazines or specific type of books, which by the way can be pricey, and not everyone has access to something cool and fun like that. I advocate for making art journaling accessible and affordable to everyone. We all don't need another budget-sensitive hobby. And if you, like me, are very much into collaging or are super curious to try it, look out for random freebies. And the first tip in this category can seem quite controversial, but please hear me out. Destigmatize dumpsters. You don't have to dumpster dive. This is not necessary. Just look for some random piles of paper stuff that can appear near dumpsters. Folks get rid of things all the time, and many people are thoughtful enough to leave their unwanted paper stuff in bags near dumpsters to give a wonderful creative opportunity to adventurous collagists. This was how in 2022, when I lived in Belgrade, I found 2 huge volumes of a vintage Yugoslavian encyclopedia about everything. It had amazing tiny illustrations and I used them as much as I could, yet I had to declutter a lot of my collected stuff when we had to move countries and pack our stuff in 2 suitcases. But I'm still always keeping my eyes peeled here. Take free magazines, leaflets and catalogs. Again, those are not as sexy as vintage books and magazines, but you never know what treasures you can find inside of them. For example, my recent favorite is a free magazine that is released seasonally and is distributed for free through a drugstore chain here that is called DM. I always make sure to pick 1 copy. It's fun to read and to try to practice my Serbian that is still very poor, and the pictures inside are very cool for using in art journal collages. On a side note, very generic local newspapers that are still printed everywhere in the world, thankfully, despite the digital era, are wonderful sources for different materials for collaging. Of course, they are not free. Some newspapers probably are free, but most of them are not, but they're still so very affordable. Ask friends, colleagues, neighbors, or even landlords for some unwanted paper goodies. When it comes to sourcing paper material for collages, the first impulse is to why. But there is always an option of asking for unwanted paper stuff. What is trash for someone can become a real treasure for you. My personal collage journey started over 13 years ago when I lived in Moscow and worked for an international marketing company. In our office, there was an archive with different magazines and newspapers that we all used for market research. And those were on different subjects and themes, from business and cars to fashion and food. The head of the archives was my good acquaintance, and we often had coffee together. And one day she allowed me to dig through a huge pile of magazines and newspapers that were going to be discarded to free space for some fresh editions. And this is how my collage obsession has begun. And by the way, here you can see the very first collage that I've created, the first collage in my life. And I used here all the sourced material that were some unexpected freebies from my friend from the archive. I no longer have this collage in its physical form, but I'm so glad that I saved a picture of it. And now, as I promised, some unexpected benefits of low cost and inventive art journaling that stretch beyond just saving money. Benefit number one is that it cures scarcity mindset. I talk about scarcity mindset a lot on all the channels that I have, on all platforms that I'm present on, because as someone with a poverty background and someone who lives in a frugal and minimalist way, not purely by choice, scarcity mindset is one of my biggest psychological challenges. Fear of not having enough, fear of wasting, fear of spending, and even fear of not spending. All this is pretty exhausting. And every time when I show to myself that I can create something that looks so good to me on my art journal pages, and that I don't have to fall for that massive desire to acquire a new set of 72 Derwent pencils, which I cannot afford, by the way, that I can completely do without them and create something incredible with what I already have. All this feels as such a relief and a very meaningful empowerment. I find new, unexpected, and inventive ways of making things to show to myself over and over again that I can make my personal art wonders happen, and that no financial crisis or import taxes or geopolitical restrictions can take this ability away from me. Second, low-cost art journaling can help release excessive self-control and self-restrictions. Let's take tutorials, for example. I love tutorials, I've followed a bunch of them, but many art tutorials, especially those that are made in academic style, require to use specific mediums in specific shades. And although this can be helpful for building specific skills, this eventually can lock us up in very known, familiar, and patterned way of making things. Finding more accessible and affordable alternatives can turn art journaling into a fun laboratory where you cannot predict the end result. And honestly, you don't have to predict it. This is the liberating power of art journaling. Your entries don't have to look like anything. They don't have to live up to any expectations. Experimenting helps get rid of hyper self-control or just hyper control in general. And this thing is yet another personal psychological challenge of mine. Recently, I read somewhere that the excessive desire to control everything comes from the past trauma of betrayal. And it made me think, where does our desire to control our own art come from? Maybe it comes from the past betrayal of ourselves, or maybe it comes from lack of self-trust. There's definitely a lot of food for thought here. By no means I insist that we creatives should ditch any fancy and artsy supplies, not at all. I love my granulating watercolors by White Nights. I adore my Derwent drawing pencils or Faber-Castell pens. With this video, I wanted to inspire you to notice and explore some new, unconventional, inventive ways of creating something that holds a very special meaning to you, something that brings that very special joy of creating something out of almost nothing, and through that helping you connect with your own self and understand yourself better. I hope that this video was inspiring or maybe even helpful in any way. If yes, please let me know in the comments. And also feel free to share your own tricks and tips for inventive art journaling. It will be very interesting to read what you have to say. There is also a text version of this video. I published it on Substack. The link will be down below. And if you like and enjoy videos that I make here on this channel or on my second channel, and you want to support my creative work, consider becoming a member of my Patreon community. On Patreon, I post weekly videos about my life in Serbia, behind the scenes creative processes, chats about psychology and philosophy, and you can join and leave at any moment. There are no strings attached. But Patreon support is my major source of income at the moment. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, dear fellow creatives. I'm wishing you a multitude of inspiring and inventive art journaling moments. And I will see you soon here on my second channel, on Substack or on Patreon. And until then, пока-пока.